Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Everything is made of wisdom. Everything is wise. Everything is aware. So what this means for us is that when we're doing practice, when we're doing meditation, or when we're doing some other sadhana, it means that we are not trying to come up with an explanation for what's happening. We're not out there in a dead material world trying to figure out things just using our mind. We are in an alive situation where wisdom is actually going to tell us what's going on. Somebody asked me last night, how can I tell if the explanations that I have for what's happening in my sadhana are fantasy or real? And I said, well, don't have any explanations. And then whatever you need to know will come to you from wisdom. Let's say that we're just meeting someone. We can relate to being in the presence of another person in a more holistic way, where we're having some understanding of how it is for the other person, what mood they're in, or how they're feeling, or something about them, in a kind of way that involves our whole body and all of our senses, where we're not thinking to ourselves, I wonder how this person is, let me see how they might be. We're just receiving a kind of a hit, I like to say, about how someone else is. So how that person is actually communicating itself to us. We don't have to, in some mechanical or aggressive way, try to discern how it is for another person just using our mind. And it's the same thing in our sadhana. We're not sitting there trying to figure things out. We're actually trying to relax and open our senses and open our mind so that we can receive the hit from wisdom, right? So that we can receive wisdom, we can receive understanding, we can receive sensation, we can receive impressions. The best way to avoid fantasy in your spiritual practice is to just not have a story about it. If you don't have a story about it, then there's no real chance you're going to fall into fantasy. You may not understand what's happening right away, or you sometimes, and surely will, if you keep practicing for years on end, feel like you're in the dark and sort of moving along with really not knowing what's going on. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're trying to relax enough that wisdom can communicate to you. So you have thoughts, of course. It's not like we're trying to eradicate thoughts, but you have more the feeling that if a thought occurs about what's happening, that it sort of just occurs. It's not something that you aggressively try to manufacture through some ordinary process of thinking. So this person that I was talking to last night had some feelings of connection with Anandamayi Ma and some thoughts about what that connection was, and she was worried that maybe these things were just fantasies. And I said, well, don't worry about it. Because if they're real, they won't go away. Don't try to manufacture these ideas. Don't try to tell a story that you made up about something that just sounds reasonable or plausible. But beings like Ma are real. They can actually tell you who they are and what your relationship is with them. You don't really need to have a story about it that you came up with. And if you do have one, and you are in a real relationship with a great being like Ma, eventually she'll just take care of it and undermine any false story that you might have. Or do it through the medium of your teacher. If we're being sincere and we're just practicing every day, and even if we might have some fantasy, they'll all eventually just go away. If we're attached to our stories, if we want to be spiritually great, if we want to have some kind of relationship with some great teacher or great being because it satisfies our ego, then of course we're going to fall into a state of fantasy. But even then, if we keep doing practice, eventually those things will also get ground away, and it'll be painful. Of course, it's always painful if you think you're in some kind of great relationship with a teacher, or you think you're a great practitioner, or you think you're having extraordinary spiritual experiences and you're really not, and you hold on to those things for years. Of course, it's painful to have them be taken away. But that's also grace. Right? When we want our practice to mean a certain thing or be important in a certain way, we actually cheat ourselves out of what really is important and great about it. Because any story that we make up and that we have ego attachment to is basically a roadblock. Whatever it is, it's a roadblock. Doesn't matter how good your story is. It's in the way of you actually feeling what's actually happening. Because people who make up stories, I don't think this person was making anything up. I think she was very sincere. But people who do make things up are doing it because they're afraid if they don't do that, they'll be confronted with some kind of failure, some kind of feeling of failure. So they make up these stories about themselves and their sadhana and other beings, etc., the great relationship they're in with these other beings. They make those stories up because they don't want to confront the possibility that they might just be ordinary, or even not ordinary, subordinary. They have this fear about that, right? So the stories become something that prevents you from confronting those feelings. And really the story of your incapacity is just as much of a fantasy as your story of your capacity. Nobody has any idea what their capacity is, because it just develops as you're doing practice, that's all. It's not a static quantity. And the greatest joy that we can have is to be in that living conversation, to have that experience of presence and really have confidence in that and feel that we have real refuge. You really can't take refuge in a story. Right? It doesn't work. So the story of how terrible I am at something is really just the same thing as a story about how great I am at something. And the idea is that by just being practical and not making up any story, then we can just be in the middle. Neither terrible nor great. We can just be nothing. We can have no measure. Just being in the middle, this is why Trungpa Rinpoche said, just be a person sitting in a room doing a practice. Don't have any other story about yourself other than that. Because it's the only way that you can avoid cutting yourself off from the livingness that's available to everybody. Just be there with no story. If you notice stories coming up that you're making up about what's happening, or feelings of pride or feelings of self-denigration, same thing. People who think they're really terrible in some way or another, it's like, do you think you're really that terrible? You're so special that you could possibly be that terrible? I mean, in a way, it's it's almost like, I'm so terrible, I'm not ordinary, right? And it's such try to escape from somehow just being a blade of grass in a field of grass. Sit down, and if you notice stories coming up, or feelings of measuring things, or pride, or self-denigration, or fantasy about this and that being, or anything that comes up like that, just let it go. Right? Let it go. Cut the cord. Because understand that even if you indulge in it, it isn't doing anything for you at all. All it's doing is blocking you from feeling what is there to be felt. It's blocking you from nourishment, from a feeling of richness. Right? My Kagyu teacher used to say things like, even the thought, I'm meditating is a fantasy. Don't even have that thought. That's hard. Don't have the thought like, that was good. Don't have a thought like, oh, I did really terribly today. Even those little tiny thoughts, don't have those thoughts. Because they're in the way of what's there for you to integrate with. But basically we want to be easy about our thoughts. We're not trying to obliterate them, but we also don't want to follow them. And when we start getting lost in them, we want to bring ourselves back to open presence, whatever way we can. So it's just like when you find those thoughts arising, you just bring yourself back to that over and over again. It's good to recognize the kinds of fantasies we're having and to really get it that they're not doing anything for us. Nothing. They're never going to bring us the satisfaction that we're looking for. And we need to start feeling that our prideful and other kinds of thoughts are prisons, that they're millstones around our neck. We need to start feeling that. We need to start feeling really uncomfortable about that. And, like, ugh. It's also, you can try to remember the transmission, or whatever your experience is of transmission. That is also just an aspect of presence. You can try to bring yourself back to that. It's very, very simple, what we're doing. When we're sitting in our altars and doing practice, it's very, very simple. It's so simple that people don't want to do it, because we like all the complications that we throw up in our mind. And then, some people will hear a talk like this and they'll go, I have a problem with my thoughts, They'll make a complication around that. And then it becomes like another thing they can distract themselves with. There's some fear that if we stop having problems, we won't have anything to talk about. I've somehow managed to keep talking. I don't know how, but it's like someone who doesn't want to give up Twinkies or Hostess cupcakes or something, or some other kind of horrible junk food. They could go to a fantastic bakery and get some incredible baked goods, but no, I don't want to give up my Twinkies. But the new thing always feels more natural and spontaneous and fulfilling and easy.